The ambulance siren split the afternoon heat like a blade through butter, its wailing cry drowning out the mariachi music drifting from the festival booths scattered across San Antonio's central plaza. 9-year-old Emilia Rivera clutched her plastic bag of homemade dulces closer to her chest, the sticky sweetness of tamarind and chili powder clinging to her fingers as she watched the white vehicle disappear around the corner of Mercado Street. Her small, bare feet shuffled against the sun-baked concrete, leaving tiny prints in the dust that swirled between vendor stalls, selling everything from hand-painted pottery to steaming elote dripping with lime and cotija cheese. The scent of grilled onions and cumin hung thick in the air, mixing with the perfume of blooming jasmine that cascaded over the wrought-iron fence surrounding the old courthouse. Dulces, sweet candies for you. Emilia's voice carried a tremor she tried to hide behind her practiced smile. Her grandmother's face flashed in her mind. Agnes Rivera, weathered hands pressed against her chest that morning, struggling for breath that seemed to slip away like water through cupped palms across the plaza. Lucas Price adjusted the microphone stand on the makeshift stage, his sandy hair catching the late afternoon light as he tested the sound system with gentle taps. The feedback squealed briefly, causing a flock of grackles to scatter from the nearby oak trees, their black wings beating against the amber sky. Testing, testing, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our community talent show in just a few minutes. His voice echoed across the square. Smooth as the river stones Agnes used to skip with Emilia when her lungs were stronger, in the corner booth of River and Rye Cafe, Grace Nolan wiped down tables with mechanical precision, her green eyes darting between the overdue invoice in her hand and the growing crowd outside. The paper trembled slightly, not from the evening breeze, but from the weight of numbers that didn't add up, rent that climbed higher each month like kudzu on a fence. Travis Cole leaned against his father's Ford pickup, arms crossed over his soccer jersey, watching the stage set up with the calculating gaze of someone who'd never doubted his place at the center of attention. His fingers drummed against the truck's metallic blue paint, a rhythm that matched the impatience building in his chest. Bunch of wannabes, he muttered to his friend Jeremy, who nodded with the automatic agreement of someone who'd learned early that challenging Travis meant sitting alone at lunch. Miguel Santos emerged from beneath the hood of his 1987 Chevy, grease staining his worn workshirt, calloused hands holding an old cassette recorder that had seen better decades. The device had belonged to his late brother, a musician who dreamed of Nashville before the cancer took those dreams, along with everything else. The recorder's red light blinked weakly, like a dying star. Emilia approached Miguel's auto shop, her bag of candies catching the light. She'd been walking for hours, the soles of her second-hand sandals growing thin against the pavement. Agnes had insisted she try to sell more today. The hospital bill sat on their kitchen table like a vulture, black numbers on white paper that seemed to grow larger each time Emilia glanced at it. "Señor Miguel," she called softly, her voice barely rising above the distant sound of accordion music. "Dulces?" Miguel looked up, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners as he recognized the girl who helped his elderly neighbor with groceries, who sang lullabies loud enough to drift through paper-thin walls on nights when the pain kept Agnes awake. The recorder in his hands suddenly crackled to life, playing a snippet of melody he'd captured weeks ago. A voice so pure it had stopped him mid-repair, made him press record without thinking. He'd almost forgotten about it until now. Emilia's eyes widened as she heard the familiar tune floating from the small speaker. It was the song Agnes hummed while braiding her hair each morning. The melody that had traveled from Mexico in her grandmother's memory, carried across borders and through decades like a prayer wrapped in music. "Where did you—" Emilia began, but Miguel raised a finger to his lips, his expression shifting from casual interest to something deeper, more urgent in the distance. The talent show's opening announcement began, Lucas's voice carrying promises of community spirit and local pride. Grace stepped outside her cafe, dish towels still in her hands, drawn by the possibility of something different, something that might lift the weight that had been pressing down on all of them. Travis straightened, preparing to claim his spotlight. He'd practiced his song for weeks, had already imagined the applause, the way his father would finally look at him with something approaching pride. But Miguel was staring at the recorder. Then at Emilia, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place behind his weathered features, the girl's voice, captured accidentally that night when she'd thought no one was listening. It was the same melody, the same heartbreaking purity that had made him stop everything and simply listen. Agnes Rivera sat in their trailer, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead, listening to the distant sounds of the festival. She closed her eyes and whispered the prayer she'd been carrying for weeks. Que Dios cuide a mi nieta. Let God watch over my granddaughter. The sirens had stopped, but something else was beginning, something that would change everything. Starting with the small plastic bag of candies trembling in a little girl's hands, and ending with a truth that no one was quite ready to hear, Miguel held up the recorder, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. "Mija," he said quietly, "I think you need to hear this." The makeshift stage stood bathed in the golden hour light that photographers dream of and children remember in their deepest memories. Colored papel picado fluttered from wire to wire overhead, casting dancing shadows across the wooden platform where Lucas had spent 2 hours ensuring every microphone cord lay flat, every speaker pointed just right. Emilia's heart hammered against her ribs as Miguel's calloused hand rested gently on her shoulder. The recorder's tinny speaker had played her own voice back to her, a voice she'd never heard from the outside, singing Agnes's lullaby while she'd helped Mrs. Gonzalez hang laundry 3 weeks ago. She hadn't known anyone was listening. "You recorded me." Her whisper carried the weight of someone who'd learned early that being noticed wasn't always safe. Miguel's eyes held the same gentleness he reserved for stray dogs and broken engines, things that needed fixing without judgment. "Sometimes the best music happens when nobody's trying to perform, Mija, your voice. It's a gift." Across the plaza, Grace Nolan emerged from River and Rye with a glass of agua fresca, condensation beading on the outside like tiny diamonds. The hibiscus flowers had steeped to a perfect ruby red, sweet and tart on her tongue, as she watched the growing crowd with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to read a community's mood from years of serving coffee and listening to stories. Lucas tapped the microphone, sending a sharp feedback squeal across the square that made everyone wince and laugh at the same time. "All right, San Antonio, are you ready for some real local talent?" His grin was infectious. The kind that made people forget their troubles for a moment and remember why they loved their neighborhood. A smattering of applause rippled through the crowd. Families spread blankets on the grass. Children chased each other between the legs of standing adults. And vendors called out last-minute offerings of churros, dusted with cinnamon, sugar, and raspas in rainbow flavors that stained tongues blue and green. Travis Cole adjusted his guitar strap, fingers dancing over familiar chords. He'd chosen Desperado because his voice cracked beautifully on the high notes, or so his private voice coach had told him. His father, Richard Cole, stood with arms crossed near his gleaming pickup, cell phone already positioned to record his son's inevitable triumph. "First up," Lucas announced, consulting his hastily scrawled list, "we have Travis Cole with a classic." Travis strode onto the stage with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his welcome anywhere. His voice, when it came, was technically perfect. Each note hit precisely where it should be. Every breath controlled and measured. The crowd applauded politely. Phones lifted to capture the performance of the mayor's nephew, the boy who'd win the county fair talent contest 3 years running. But something was missing. Grace found herself looking past Travis to where Emilia stood beside Miguel's truck, her plastic bag of candies forgotten at her feet. The girl's lips moved silently, following the melody, and Grace realized she was harmonizing with a song she'd probably never heard before. 2 more performers followed, Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter with a violin, and Joey Martinez showing off dance moves he'd learned from YouTube videos. Polite applause followed each act, the kind of community support that felt warm, but not particularly memorable. Miguel caught Emilia's elbow as she started to back away from the crowd. Esperate. Little one, your turn. I didn't sign up. Panic fluttered in her voice like a trapped bird. I just sell dulces, I don't perform. The best singers never think they do. Miguel's smile carried decades of watching people underestimate themselves. What would Agnes say? At the mention of her grandmother's name, Emilia's hand moved unconsciously to the small silver cross at her throat. A gift from Agnes on her last birthday, worn thin from generations of faithful women who'd carried it through impossible circumstances. Lucas was beginning to wrap up the show when Miguel stepped forward, one hand raised. Oye, one more if you'll have us. The crowd turned, curious. Lucas shrugged. The more local participation, the better for his community outreach report. Come on, mija. Miguel's voice held the same gentle insistence Agnes used when coaxing Emilia to try something new. Just one song. For your abuela. Grace found herself moving closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The girl looked so small standing there. Her cotton dress faded from too many washings, her hair escaping from its careful braid in the evening humidity. Emilia walked toward the stage on unsteady legs. Each step feeling like walking underwater. The microphone seemed enormous when she reached for it, its metal surface warm from the day's heat and slick with condensation. The crowd's chatter gradually faded to whispers, then to silence. Even the children seemed to sense something was about to happen, their restless energy settling into anticipation. Emilia closed her eyes and thought of Agnes, lying in their trailer with a washcloth on her forehead. Listening to the distant festival sounds through walls thin as paper, she thought of the lullaby that had traveled from Mexico to Texas in her grandmother's heart, the melody that had soothed her through chicken pox and nightmares and the long, worried nights when Agnes's breathing grew too shallow. When she opened her mouth, the first note floated across the plaza like something physical. Honey and heartbreak and hope, all wrapped in the voice of a child who'd learned too early that love sometimes means watching someone you need slowly slip away. The Spanish lyrics poured out of her, each word carrying the weight of generations. Duérmete, mi niña, que te voy a cantar. Sleep, my child, I'm going to sing to you. Travis's confident smirk faltered. Grace's hand flew to her heart. Lucas fumbled for his phone, suddenly desperate to capture this moment that felt like watching lightning strike. By the second verse, cell phones throughout the crowd began lifting. Recording without conscious thought, the melody soared and dipped, Emilia's voice growing stronger with each note until it seemed impossible that something so vast and beautiful could come from someone so small. When the last note faded into the evening air, silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, then applause erupted like a breaking dam. Not polite, not obligatory, but the kind of ovation that comes from witnessing something genuinely extraordinary. In her trailer, Agnes Rivera pressed her hand to the window, tears streaming down her cheeks as that familiar melody drifted to her on the evening breeze, sung with a power and purity that made her believe, for the first time in months, that miracles might still be possible. The video started spreading before Emilia had even stepped off the stage. Grace watched the view counter on Marcus Webb's Facebook livestream climb from dozens to hundreds in the span of minutes. Neighbors tagging neighbors. Friends sharing with friends who'd moved away but still called San Antonio home. Mija, you did something special tonight. Miguel's voice carried a tremor of excitement as he helped Emilia down the stage steps. Her legs still shaky from adrenaline and disbelief. The crowd hadn't dispersed the way crowds usually did after community events. Instead, people lingered, clustering around food trucks and vendor stalls, their conversations humming with the electric energy that follows unexpected beauty. Children who'd been restless during other performances now sat cross-legged on blankets, asking their parents to replay the video one more time. Lucas packed up his equipment with unusual care, his hands moving slowly as if trying to preserve the memory of those 4 minutes when his modest community showcase had transformed into something approaching magic. His phone buzzed constantly, notifications from the radio station's social media accounts where the video was being shared and reshared by listeners he'd never met. "Grace!" he called out as she approached with a fresh glass of agua fresca for Emilia. "Did you see the numbers? We're at 1,500 shares and climbing." Grace handed the drink to Emilia, noting how the girl's hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. The hibiscus flowers had turned the water deep red, like liquid garnets, and Emilia sipped it carefully while scanning the crowd for familiar faces that might judge her for stepping forward when she should have stayed invisible. "Is this bad?" Emilia whispered, noticing the way some people were staring. She'd spent 9 years learning to be unnoticed, understanding instinctively that attention could be dangerous for people like her, poor people, undocumented families, children whose lives balanced on the edge of systems that could change without warning. "No, baby," Grace said softly, crouching to Emilia's eye level. "This is the opposite of bad." But across the plaza, Richard Cole was having a very different conversation with his son. Travis sat in the passenger seat of the Ford pickup, his guitar case stowed in the bed like evidence of a crime he couldn't quite name. "I don't understand it," Travis muttered, watching the video play on his father's phone for the 3rd time. "She's just some kid I've had years of training." Richard Cole's jaw tightened as he observed the continuing crowd around the stage area, their attention focused on a girl who shouldn't matter, who wasn't part of their careful social calculations. "Technical skill isn't everything, son. Sometimes people get swept up in novelty." The word novelty carried weight in Richard's mouth, the kind of dismissive judgment that reduced complex things to manageable categories. He'd spent years building his influence in San Antonio through careful relationship management and strategic positioning. His son's talent was supposed to be part of that strategy. Another asset in the family portfolio, meanwhile, Agnes Rivera had managed to dress herself and walk the 3 blocks from their trailer to the plaza. Her breathing labored, but her determination ironclad. She arrived just as Emilia finished thanking the small group of people who'd approached to offer congratulations and ask her name. "Abuela!" Emilia rushed to her grandmother's side. Immediately slipping under her arm to provide support, Agnes felt lighter than she should have, as if the illness was slowly erasing her from the inside out. "I heard you, Mija," Agnes whispered, her voice thick with pride and exhaustion. "The whole neighborhood heard you, Mrs. Gonzalez came running to tell me an angel was singing in the plaza." Miguel watched the reunion with soft eyes, remembering his own grandmother's pride when he'd rebuilt his first engine at 14. Some gifts skipped generations, lying dormant until the right moment called them forth. Lucas approached the small group, his radio station badge catching the light from the string of bulbs overhead. "Emilia, I'm Lucas Price from KSAT FM. Would it be okay if I talk to you and your grandmother for a few minutes?" Agnes straightened, her maternal instincts sharpening despite her physical weakness. "About what?" "People are already calling the station," Lucas explained gently. "They want to know more about Emilia's story, where she learned to sing like that. If she performs regularly, there's interest from people who might be able to help." Help. The word hung in the air like a soap bubble, beautiful and fragile and possibly too good to touch without breaking. Grace moved closer, her cafe owner's intuition reading the mixture of hope and fear in Agnes's expression. She'd watched enough families struggle with medical bills to recognize the particular desperation that came with loving someone you couldn't afford to save. "What kind of help?" Agnes asked carefully. "There's a music producer in Austin who shared the video," Lucas said, pulling up the social media post on his phone. "Jason Kumar. He works with emerging artists, especially young talent. He's asking if Emilia would be interested in a meeting." The number below the producer's comment showed 847 shares and 2,200 likes. In the comments, people were using words like incredible and star and next big thing. There were also emojis, hearts and crying laughing faces and flames, digital expressions of emotions that couldn't quite be captured in words. Travis watched from the pickup truck as his father made a phone call, walking away from the vehicle with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to solving problems through connections and influence. Richard Cole knew people at the radio station, people at City Hall, people who could ask questions about permits and insurance liability and whether proper vetting had been done for this impromptu talent show. "What's happening now?" Grace asked Miguel quietly, noticing the way his expression had shifted from celebration to something more cautious. Miguel's gaze followed Richard Cole's retreating figure. He'd grown up in neighborhoods where good things were often followed by complications, where success could attract the wrong kind of attention just as easily as the right kind. "Politics," Miguel said simply. "Some people don't like it when the wrong person gets the spotlight." Agnes felt the shift too, the way conversations around them had taken on an undercurrent of whispered speculation. She'd lived long enough to recognize the particular tension that arose when someone from her world, the world of trailer payments and food stamps and medical bills, suddenly found themselves at the center of attention that usually belonged to other people's children. "Should we go home?" Agnes asked, her voice barely audible above the continuing festival sounds. Emilia looked around the plaza. At Lucas, with his kind eyes and radio station badge, at Grace with her gentle smile and agua fresca, at Miguel with his protective presence and recorder full of possibilities. Then she looked at her grandmother, whose love had been the steady ground beneath her feet for 9 years, and whose time was running out like sand through an hourglass they couldn't flip over. "Not yet, abuela," Emilia said quietly. "I think maybe something important is starting." In the distance, Richard Cole finished his phone call and began walking back toward the truck, his expression set in the determined lines of a man who'd decided to take action. The first comment appeared at 2017 a.m., buried beneath hundreds of heart emojis and Spanish phrases of support. "Anyone else think this sounds too polished for a random street kid? Check the audio levels. Something's not right here." By morning, the seed of doubt had sprouted into a thorny debate across multiple social media platforms. The username TruthSeeker2023 had been busy, posting technical analysis about audio compression and digital enhancement, questioning whether a 9-year-old could really produce such studio-quality sound from a basic PA system. Miguel discovered the controversy when he opened his shop at dawn, his phone buzzing with notifications from the video that had been tagged to his business page. His coffee grew cold as he scrolled through comments that ranged from defending Emilia's authenticity to demanding investigation into what they were calling obvious manipulation. "Manufactured viral content," read one post with 43 likes. "Notice how the audio is suspiciously clean for an outdoor recording. Check the shadows on the stage. They don't match the lighting. Fake." Grace found the conspiracy theories while opening River and Rye. Her morning routine of grinding coffee beans and arranging pastries interrupted by the phone calls that had started before 6 a.m. Customers wanted to know if she'd witnessed the hoax, if she'd been paid to participate in some elaborate marketing scheme. "Marketing scheme for what?" she'd asked the third caller, genuine confusion bleeding into her voice. "That's what we're trying to figure out," came the reply. "But nobody just gets famous overnight anymore without money behind it." Across town, Lucas arrived at XAT FM to find his station manager already fielding calls from regional media outlets and local government officials, asking pointed questions about event permits, insurance liability, and background checks for performers. "Price, what exactly did you verify before putting that kid on stage?" Station manager Betty Rodriguez sat behind her desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "Verify, Betty? It was a community talent show. Miguel Santos vouched for her. He's lived here for 30 years. The girl's grandmother was in the audience. What was I supposed to verify?" Betty's expression suggested there should have been something, some protocol that would have prevented the station from becoming entangled in whatever this situation was becoming. The doubt campaign had been methodical and strategic. Screenshots of the video played at different speeds, attempting to show inconsistencies in Emilia's lip movement. Audio spectrograms that claimed to reveal digital manipulation, carefully worded questions about why a poor girl would have such professional quality performance skills. Emilia Rivera felt the shift in her neighborhood before she saw the comments. Mrs. Gonzalez, who'd run over the night before with tears in her eyes and a plate of fresh tortillas, now avoided eye contact when they passed on the sidewalk. The mailman, who usually stopped to ask about Agnes's health, delivered their mail without his customary greeting. "Abuela, what's happening?" Emilia asked as they walked to the corner store for milk and bread. She'd noticed the way conversations stopped when they approached, the way phones appeared in people's hands like weapons of documentation. Agnes squeezed her granddaughter's hand, feeling the calluses on Emilia's palms from carrying the bag of dulces block after block. Day after day. Sometimes, Mija, when beautiful things happen, some people need to find reasons they shouldn't be beautiful. At Cole Construction's main office, Richard Cole set down his phone after a 40-minute conversation with Marcus Webb, the man who'd originally live-streamed Emilia's performance. The conversation had been productive, exploring possibilities of technical error, equipment malfunction, or simple misunderstanding about audio quality. "Dad, are you really doing this?" Travis asked from the doorway of his father's office. He'd heard enough of the phone call to understand the general direction of his father's investigation. Richard looked up from a notepad covered with names and phone numbers, contacts at social media companies, audio engineering firms, and digital forensic specialists. "I'm getting to the truth, son. If that girl's performance was genuine, then there's nothing to worry about. If it wasn't," he shrugged. Leaving the implications unsaid, Travis felt something uncomfortable settle in his stomach. He'd been angry about being upstaged, frustrated that his polished performance had been forgotten in favor of what seemed like beginner's luck. But watching his father methodically construct doubt felt different than simple competition. Miguel's investigation was running parallel to Richard's, but pointing in the opposite direction. The old recorder had a timestamp feature, and the file he'd captured showed clear metadata indicating when and where Emilia's voice had been recorded. No studio manipulation, no digital enhancement, just a girl singing while hanging laundry. Unaware anyone was listening, he'd also started making calls, but his contacts were different from Richard's. Former musicians who'd worked in legitimate studios, sound engineers who could distinguish between natural acoustics and digital processing, and one particularly helpful audio forensics expert who owed him a favor from their army days together. "The voice print is consistent across all frequencies," the expert had told him over the phone. "If this is fake, it's the most sophisticated vocal manipulation I've ever seen, and honestly, Miguel, it would cost more money than makes sense for a hoax this small." But facts and forensic analysis couldn't compete with the visceral appeal of conspiracy theories, especially ones that confirmed existing suspicions about who deserved sudden success and who didn't. Grace noticed the change in her cafe's atmosphere by midday. Customers who usually chatted warmly about community events were instead clustered around tables. Phones out, voices lowered as they shared theories about manufactured viral content and exploitation of vulnerable children. "It's just convenient, you know," she overheard from the corner booth. "Poor kid, sick grandmother, perfect sob story. Someone saw an opportunity and took it." Lucas found himself defending Emilia's authenticity on 3 different radio shows, but his voice lacked conviction, not because he doubted what he'd witnessed, but because he was beginning to understand that truth and perception weren't the same thing, and perception was winning. The producer from Austin called that afternoon to postpone their scheduled meeting, just until the controversy dies down. Jason Kumar explained. "I believe the kid is genuine, but my investors are nervous about association with potential scandal." When Agnes answered the phone and heard the cancellation, her hand trembled as she set the receiver back in its cradle. The hospital bill still sat on their kitchen table, and the payment deadline hadn't moved despite the previous night's brief surge of hope. "What did they say, Abuela?" Emilia asked from the couch where she was carefully rewrapping unsold candies from the day before. Agnes looked at her granddaughter, this child who'd spent the morning being stared at by neighbors, who'd heard whispers about fake voices and manufactured stories, who'd gone from community treasure to community controversy in less than 24 hours. They said, "Maybe later, Mija, when things settle down," outside their trailer. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravel parking area. The festival decorations from the night before were being taken down, leaving the plaza looking ordinary again, as if the magic had been carefully packed away with the string lights and folded tablecloths. Emilia nodded and continued wrapping candy, her small hands steady despite the confusion and hurt that she was too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel settling into her bones like winter cold. The phone call from the city came Tuesday morning at 8:47 a.m., while Agnes was braiding Emilia's hair for school and trying to ignore the persistent ache in her chest that seemed to grow stronger each day. "Mrs. Rivera, this is Carol Martinez from the Parks and Recreation Department. We need to discuss some concerns about the weekend event where your granddaughter performed." Agnes held the phone with one hand while her fingers continued their practiced work through Emilia's dark hair. She'd been braiding hair for 60 years, first her sister's, then her daughter's, now her granddaughter's, and the rhythm was as automatic as breathing. "What concerns?" Agnes asked, though her stomach already knew the answer before her mind caught up. "There are questions about permits and insurance liability. The event wasn't properly registered, and now there are complications. We're going to need you to come in for a meeting." After Agnes hung up, she finished the braid in silence, her fingers trembling slightly as she tied the ribbon that had belonged to Emilia's mother. Emilia watched in the mirror, reading worry in the set of her grandmother's shoulders, the way children learn to read storm clouds. At XAT FM, Lucas stared at the email that had arrived overnight from the station's corporate headquarters. "Effective immediately, suspend all promotion of the 422 Community Talent Show video. Refer media inquiries to legal department." Betty Rodriguez knocked on his office doorframe, holding a manila folder thick with printed documents. "The insurance company is asking questions. They want to know why we promoted an unvetted performer, especially a minor, without proper background checks." Background checks. Lucas's coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he kept sipping it anyway, needing something to do with his hands. "Betty, she's 9 years old from this neighborhood. What was I supposed to check? Her criminal record. Don't get smart with me. In Price, the lawyers are nervous about liability if something comes out later, child exploitation, immigration status, family situation. They want documentation we don't have." The video's view count had plateaued at 127,000 views, but the comment section had become a battlefield. Professional music teachers were analyzing Emilia's vocal technique, some calling it impossible for her age, others defending it as pure natural talent. Immigration activists were demanding to know why a child was selling candy on streets instead of in school. Conservative voices were questioning whether tax-funded community events should promote performers whose legal status hadn't been verified. Miguel closed his auto shop early to drive to the municipal building, where he found Agnes sitting in the waiting area of the Parks and Recreation office, her hands folded in her lap with the careful stillness of someone trying to become invisible. "Agnes," he said softly, taking the plastic chair beside her. "Cómo estás?" "Asustada," she admitted, scared. The word carried more weight in Spanish, acknowledged a fear that went bone deep. Carol Martinez appeared at 3:15 p.m. her clipboard and tight smile suggesting this was a formality she'd rather avoid. The conference room was beige and windowless, fluorescent lights humming overhead like trapped insects. "Mrs. Rivera, Mr. Santos, thank you for coming in. We need to clarify some details about Saturday's performance." The questions started gently but grew sharper. Was Emilia enrolled in school? Did she have work permits for selling candy? What was her immigration status? Who owned the recording equipment used? Had anyone paid her to perform? Agnes answered in careful English, her accent thickening under stress, each response feeling like stepping on uncertain ground that might give way beneath her feet. "The issue," Carol explained, consulting her papers, "is that the video has attracted attention beyond our community. We have media outlets asking questions, and we need to ensure everything was appropriate." Miguel leaned forward. Appropriate. A little girl sang at a community show. What's inappropriate about that? "The concerns," Carol said delicately, "involve whether proper supervision was provided, whether the child was exploited, and whether the event itself was conducted according to city regulations." At River and Rye, Grace watched through her cafe windows as a news van from San Antonio's Channel 5 parked across from the plaza. A reporter in a crisp blue suit stood under the oak tree where families had spread blankets Saturday night, gesturing toward the empty stage while a cameraman captured B-roll footage. Her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. "Seeing news coverage about your area. Hope there won't be ongoing issues affecting business district reputation. Call me." Grace closed her eyes and tried to remember Saturday night's magic, the way Emilia's voice had transformed an ordinary evening into something extraordinary, the way strangers had become community in the space of a 4-minute song. The memory felt increasingly distant, like trying to hold on to a dream. After waking, Richard Cole had spent Tuesday morning in meetings with what he called concerned citizens, business owners worried about negative publicity, school board members questioning safety protocols, and fellow contractors who understood the importance of proper permits and insurance coverage. "It's not about the girl personally," he explained to Travis over lunch at their usual restaurant. "It's about accountability. If we let one event slide, where does it end?" Travis pushed rice around his plate, his appetite gone. He'd won the school talent show that morning, a competition he'd dominated for 3 years running. But this time, receiving the small trophy felt hollow. The auditorium had been half empty, and several classmates had been more interested in discussing Emilia's video than watching his performance. "What happens to her now?" Travis asked. Richard cut his steak with surgical precision. "That depends on whether everything was legitimate. If it was, then she'll be fine. If there were irregularities," he shrugged, implying consequences that remained deliberately vague. Agnes and Miguel left the municipal building at 4:30 p.m. with a stack of forms to complete and deadlines that felt impossible to meet. Background checks, documentation requirements, insurance assessments, a bureaucratic maze designed for people with lawyers and time and resources they didn't possess. "¿Qué vamos a hacer?" Agnes asked as they sat in Miguel's truck in the parking lot. "What are we going to do?" Miguel stared through the windshield at the city building where they'd just been politely informed that Emilia's moment of beauty had become a problem, requiring official solutions. "We're going to fight," he said finally, but carefully. That evening, Emilia helped her grandmother prepare dinner, beans and rice with the last of their good chorizo, flavored with optimism they were running low on. Agnes moved slowly around their small kitchen, pausing to catch her breath more frequently than usual. "Are we in trouble, Abuela?" Emilia asked, setting their mismatched plates on the folding table they used for meals. Agnes looked at her granddaughter, this child who'd done nothing but share a gift that lived in her heart, who'd sung with the pure intention of honoring the lullabies that had raised her. Now that same gift was being examined under fluorescent lights by strangers with clipboards who'd never heard Agnes sing those same songs through nights of fever and fear and love too large for their small trailer. "No, mija," Agnes said, though her voice carried doubt like an unwelcome guest. "We're not in trouble. Sometimes good things just take longer than we hope." Outside their window, the plaza sat empty under streetlights that turned everything the color of old photographs. While somewhere in the municipal building, files were being opened that would determine whether a 9-year-old girl's voice was worth the complications it had created. Wednesday morning brought Miguel to the doorstep of the Chronicle's small office building, where investigative reporter Elena Vasquez had been covering San Antonio community issues for 12 years. Her desk was cluttered with the detritus of ongoing stories, immigration court documents, school board meeting transcripts, and printouts of social media threads that had caught her attention. "Miguel Santos," she said, recognizing him from various neighborhood events. "I heard you were connected to that viral video situation." Miguel set down a manila envelope containing the original recorder, complete with metadata timestamps and audio analysis from his army friend. "I need someone to tell the truth before lies become facts." Elena opened the envelope and examined the contents with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to distinguish between genuine evidence and manufactured proof. The technical documentation was thorough. Frequency analysis, background noise patterns, and digital signatures that would be nearly impossible to fake, convincingly. "This is compelling," she admitted. "But why bring it to me instead of posting it online?" "Because online, truth and lies look the same until someone with credibility verifies which is which." At the municipal building, Carol Martinez was fielding calls from increasingly frustrated officials who'd been expecting this situation to resolve quietly. Instead, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets, and social media engagement was climbing rather than fading. "Ma'am," her assistant informed her through the intercom, "there's someone from the Chronicle here asking about public records related to community event permits." Elena Vasquez had learned that small-town controversies often revealed larger systemic issues, and this story was checking multiple boxes: economic inequality, bureaucratic overreach, social media manipulation, and the particular vulnerability of immigrant families navigating systems designed for people with different resources. Her first stop after reviewing Miguel's evidence was River and Rye, where Grace was training a new barista while fielding calls from customers asking whether the cafe was still a safe space for families. "Grace Nolan," Elena introduced herself and ordered a café de olla while pulling out her notebook. "I'm investigating the Emilia Rivera situation. You were there Saturday night." Grace paused in her demonstration of the espresso machine, reading Elena's expression for signs of agenda. Journalists, in her experience, arrived with stories half-written in their minds. "I saw a little girl sing beautifully," Grace said carefully. "Then I watched people try to convince themselves it wasn't real. Why do you think that happened?" Grace considered the question while steaming milk. The familiar routine giving her hands something to do while her mind worked. Same reason some people thought the moon landing was fake. Sometimes the world serves up something magical, and we'd rather believe in conspiracy than accept that beautiful things can happen without permission. Elena's second stop was Travis Cole's school. Where she'd requested an interview through proper channels, she found him in the music room during lunch period, practicing piano with the mechanical precision of someone going through motions rather than feeling music. "Travis, I'm Elena Vasquez from the Chronicle. I'm writing about the community talent show Saturday night." Travis's hands stilled on the keys. He'd been dreading this moment, when someone would ask him directly about his feelings regarding Emilia's performance and its aftermath. "I don't really have anything to say. The thing is," Elena said gently, settling into a nearby chair, "your father has been pretty vocal about concerns regarding the event's legitimacy. I'm wondering if you share those concerns." Travis resumed playing. A simple melody that sounded familiar, but Elena couldn't place. His technique was flawless, each note precisely where it should be, but the music felt hollow. "Have you heard her sing?" Travis asked without looking up from the keys. "Not in person, no. If you had, you wouldn't be asking if it was real. His voice carried something between resignation and revelation. When she sang, it was like the air changed. You can't fake that. Elena made a note, recognizing the particular weight that came when someone admitted a truth they'd been trying to avoid. Meanwhile, Emilia Rivera sat in Dr. Patricia Moreno's office, discussing test results that weren't getting better and treatment options that kept requiring resources she didn't have. The stress of the past week had accelerated her symptoms: shortness of breath, chest tightness, fatigue that felt like drowning in slow motion. "Agnes, I need to be direct with you," Dr. Moreno said. Her hands folded over the file. "The treatment we discussed isn't optional anymore. It's becoming urgent." Agnes nodded, understanding that urgency in medical contexts meant the difference between difficult and impossible was narrowing. "How long?" "With treatment, we're looking at management rather than cure. Without treatment," Dr. Moreno's pause carried implications that didn't need to be spoken aloud. At KSAT FM, Lucas was reviewing Elena's request for interview and access to the original video footage. His initial impulse was to decline. The station's legal department had been clear about minimizing further exposure, but something in Elena's reputation for fair reporting made him reconsider. "Betty," he knocked on his supervisor's door. "Elena Vasquez wants to interview me about Saturday night." Betty looked up from her computer, where she'd been drafting a statement for corporate headquarters, explaining how a simple community event had become a regional news story. "Absolutely not. Legal was explicit. No more statements without approval. But what if she's trying to set the record straight? What if staying silent makes us look guilty of something we didn't do?" Betty's expression suggested she was weighing unknown risks against each other, trying to calculate which choice would cause less damage to the station's reputation. Elena's investigation was revealing a pattern she'd seen before in small communities, when something unexpected challenged established hierarchies. The response was often to question the unexpected rather than examine the hierarchies. She spent the afternoon reviewing public records about Cole Construction's community involvement, KSAT FM's corporate structure, and the specific regulations governing community events in city parks. The paper trail was illuminating, not because it revealed conspiracy, but because it showed how easily bureaucratic processes could be weaponized when someone wanted to create obstacles. That evening, Elena sat in her car outside the Rivera's trailer park, organizing her notes before the interview she'd scheduled with Agnes and Emilia. The area was tidy but worn, marked by the particular dignity that came when people maintained pride despite limited resources. Agnes answered the door wearing her best dress, a navy blue outfit she reserved for church and medical appointments, carefully mended but clean and pressed. Emilia stood beside her, hair braided with the same ribbon she'd worn Saturday night. "Mrs. Rivera, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I want to make sure people hear your side of this story." Agnes nodded, gesturing them toward the small living area where she'd arranged plastic chairs in a circle. The trailer was cramped but meticulously organized. Every surface clean, family photographs arranged with careful attention on the limited shelf space. "Before we start," Elena said, "I want you to know that I've seen the technical analysis of the recording. There's no evidence of digital manipulation. Your granddaughter's voice is real." Agnes's shoulders relaxed slightly, some tension releasing that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "We know it's real. We just don't understand why people needed to make it complicated." Emilia sat quietly beside her grandmother, hands folded in her lap, with the careful stillness of children who'd learned early that adult conversations could determine their futures in ways they couldn't control. "Emilia," Elena said gently, "can you tell me about Saturday night? What was it like to sing for so many people?" Emilia looked to her grandmother for permission before answering. "It felt like singing to Abuela when she can't sleep, like the song wanted to help people feel better." Elena made notes, recognizing the particular authenticity that came from someone too young to construct sophisticated explanations for simple truths. Outside the trailer windows, the evening light was fading to purple, And somewhere across town, people were sharing theories about manufactured viral content and exploitation of vulnerable children. While in a small living room, a grandmother and granddaughter sat with a reporter who was beginning to understand that this story was about much more than one song on one night. Elena Vasquez's article appeared in Thursday's Chronicle under the headline, "Community or Conspiracy? The Real Story Behind San Antonio's Viral Voice." The piece methodically dismantled the technical arguments against Emilia's authenticity while exposing the coordinated nature of the doubt campaign. She traced the earliest suspicious comments to accounts linked through IP addresses and posting patterns, revealing that Truth Seeker 2023 and several other vocal skeptics were connected to Cole Construction's digital marketing firm. The technical analysis she'd commissioned independently confirmed Miguel's findings. No digital manipulation, no audio enhancement beyond basic amplification. Most damaging to the conspiracy narrative was Elena's interview with sound engineer Rebecca Martinez, who'd worked on major label recordings in Nashville before moving back to San Antonio. Rebecca had analyzed the audio at Elena's request and provided a detailed explanation of why Emilia's performance couldn't have been faked with equipment available at a community event. To create this level of vocal manipulation in real time would require studio-grade processors worth more than most people's cars, Rebecca was quoted as saying. And honestly, why would you fake a 9-year-old singing a lullaby? It's not exactly a lucrative market. Richard Cole read the article at his breakfast table, his coffee growing cold as he absorbed the implications. Elena had been thorough, fair, but devastating, laying out a timeline that made his company's involvement in the controversy look calculated and mean-spirited. His phone started ringing before he finished reading. Business partners who'd supported his concerns were now asking pointed questions about his motivations. The mayor's office wanted clarification about Cole Construction's role in what looked increasingly like harassment of a child and her family. "Dad," Travis said from the kitchen doorway, still in his school clothes from the night before. "I read it online. Is it true?" Richard set down the newspaper, seeing his son's expression shift through confusion. Disappointment, and something approaching disgust. "It's more complicated than the article suggests." "How is it complicated? You tried to destroy a little girl because she sang better than I did." The accusation hung between them like smoke from a house fire, visible, toxic, and impossible to pretend away. At KSAT FM, Lucas arrived to find Betty Rodriguez in emergency meetings with corporate headquarters and the station's legal team. Elena's article had explicitly cleared the radio station of wrongdoing while documenting the external pressure they'd received to distance themselves from Emilia's story. "Price," Betty called him into her office. "Legal says we're in the clear. Corporate wants us to resume normal coverage, maybe even interview the girl if her family agrees." Lucas felt something unclench in his chest that he hadn't realized had been tight for days. "What about the producer from Austin?" Jason Kumar called this morning. "He wants to reschedule the meeting he cancelled, apparently. Authenticity confirmed by independent investigation is even better than authenticity assumed." Miguel opened his auto shop to find a small crowd waiting. Not customers, but neighbors who'd come to apologize, to explain their doubts, to admit they'd let fear override their own eyes and ears. Mrs. Gonzalez appeared first, carrying a covered dish that smelled like comfort food and forgiveness. "Miguel, I'm sorry. I let people convince me of things I knew weren't true." Others followed throughout the morning. Families who'd been at the talent show, business owners who'd questioned the video's authenticity online. Even a few teenagers who'd shared conspiracy theories without thinking about the real people behind them. Grace watched the pilgrimage to Miguel's shop from her cafe windows, recognizing the particular shame that came when communities realized they'd turned against their own children. She'd spent the morning fielding calls from customers apologizing for avoiding her cafe, explaining they'd been concerned about being associated with controversial events. "It's fine," she told each caller. Though something in her heart had shifted during those days of doubt, she'd learned how quickly fear could dissolve the bonds that made neighborhoods into communities. Agnes Rivera sat with Emilia at their kitchen table. The Chronicle article spread between them, alongside the medical bills that hadn't disappeared, despite everything else changing. Elena's investigation had vindicated them publicly, but Agnes's illness was indifferent to public opinion. "What happens now, Abuela?" Emilia asked, tracing patterns on the newspaper with her finger. Agnes looked at her granddaughter. This child whose voice had become a symbol of authenticity in a world suspicious of beauty, whose gift had survived attempts to diminish it through bureaucracy and doubt. "Now we see if people remember why they loved your song before they started worrying about whether they should." The phone rang at 2:30 p.m. Jason Kumar, the producer from Austin, had specific questions about Emilia's availability for a recording session. "Not immediately," he explained, "but soon. He wanted to capture her voice while it still carried the particular quality that made Saturday night magical." "We'd handle all expenses, of course," he explained to Agnes. "Transportation, accommodation, medical support if needed. This isn't about exploitation. It's about preserving something rare. Medical support." The phrase carried weight Agnes hadn't expected to hear in the context of her granddaughter's singing. She'd been preparing to choose between Emilia's opportunities and her own treatment, but maybe that choice had just become more complicated. At Cole Construction's headquarters, Richard Cole was having a different kind of conversation with his business partners. The public relations damage from Elena's article was significant, but the revelation of the coordinated doubt campaign was worse. Several major contracts were being reconsidered by clients who questioned the company's ethics. "Richard," said Tom Patterson, his largest investor, "I need to understand how we went from supporting community events to appearing to attack children in the media." Richard had no good answer. Because the truth was simple and ugly. He'd seen his son's disappointment and channeled it into something destructive, using his resources to tear down a child rather than help his son understand that talent couldn't be owned or controlled. Travis found his father in the office that evening, staring at a computer screen showing Cole Construction's social media pages where apologies were being demanded and contracts were being questioned. "I want to apologize to her," Travis said, "to Emilia and her grandmother." Richard looked up at his son, this boy he'd been trying to shape into a version of himself, not realizing the version of himself he was modeling wasn't someone worth becoming. "We both should," Richard said quietly, "but apologies need to be backed up with actions, or they're just more noise." Elena Vasquez's article had accomplished more than setting the record straight. It had forced a community to confront how quickly they'd abandoned their own children when faced with manufactured doubt. It had exposed the particular vulnerability of families without resources to defend themselves against coordinated attacks. And it had raised questions about who controlled narratives and why some stories were treated as suspicious while others were accepted without investigation. But most importantly, it had reminded San Antonio why they'd fallen in love with a 9-year-old's voice on a Saturday night when the world had briefly stopped to listen to something pure and true and extraordinary. As evening fell, Agnes and Emilia sat on their small porch, watching the sunset paint the trailer park in shades of gold that made even the most humble spaces look touched by grace. Tomorrow would bring new decisions about recordings and treatments and opportunities that had seemed impossible just a week ago. "Canta un poco, mija," Agnes whispered, "sing a little." Emilia's voice rose soft and clear in the evening air, carrying the same lullaby that had started everything, and neighbors in nearby trailers opened their windows to listen. Remembering why they'd believed in magic before they'd been convinced to doubt it, Friday morning brought satellite trucks and news vans to the plaza, transforming the quiet community space into a media circus that made locals feel like strangers in their own neighborhood. Elena Vasquez's article had been picked up by national outlets, turning Emilia's story into a broader conversation about authenticity, community, and the speed with which social media could weaponize doubt. Lucas stood on the same stage where everything had begun 5 days earlier, adjusting a microphone for what KSAT FM was calling a community response forum. The morning air carried the scent of fresh coffee from Grace's cafe and exhaust from news vehicles, an olfactory mixture of hometown comfort and external attention that felt like watching your family on television. Agnes Rivera had spent an hour that morning helping Emilia choose what to wear, settling on the same cotton dress from Saturday night, but with fresh ribbons in her hair, a small gesture toward continuity in a week that had upended everything they thought they knew about their place in the world. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to say," Agnes reminded her granddaughter as they walked toward the plaza. "These people came to hear you, not to judge you." But Emilia had learned enough about adult attention this week to understand that the distinction between hearing and judging wasn't always clear. She carried her plastic bag of dulces, not because she planned to sell them, but because their familiar weight in her hands provided comfort in a situation that felt surreal. Richard Cole arrived at the plaza in his work truck rather than his usual sedan, a small gesture toward humility that didn't go unnoticed by neighbors who'd watched his campaign against Emilia unfold over the past week. Travis sat beside him, pale with the particular nervousness that came from preparing to admit wrongdoing in public. Miguel had closed his auto shop for the morning, standing near the stage with the protective awareness of someone who'd appointed himself guardian of a situation that could still go wrong in numerous ways. His original recorder sat in his shirt pocket, not because anyone still questioned its contents, but because physical evidence felt important when facing crowds and cameras. Grace propped open her cafe doors and set up an extra coffee station on the sidewalk. Understanding that community healing often happened around shared food and familiar flavors, she'd made tres leches cake that morning, following her grandmother's recipe, because sweetness felt necessary for what might be a bitter conversation. The crowd gathered gradually, families from the neighborhood mixing with reporters, city officials standing uncomfortably beside community activists, children who should have been in school sitting on blankets with parents who'd decided this mattered more than perfect attendance. Lucas stepped to the microphone at 10 a.m., his voice carrying across the plaza with the warmth that had made him a trusted community voice for 6 years. 5 days ago, we gathered here for a simple talent show. A little girl sang a lullaby, and something beautiful happened. Then fear and doubt tried to convince us that beauty was suspicious. He paused, scanning the crowd, making eye contact with faces he'd known for years, people who'd called his radio show, attended his community events, trusted him to reflect their values back to them. Today, we have a chance to remember who we are when we're not afraid. Elena Vasquez spoke first, summarizing her investigation with the clinical precision of someone presenting evidence to a jury. The technical analysis, the pattern of coordinated doubt, the revelation of manufactured conspiracy. Facts laid out, like building blocks of a case that had already been decided, but facts weren't the same as accountability. And the crowd's attention shifted to Richard Cole when Lucas called him to the microphone. Richard climbed the 3 steps to the stage with the careful movements of someone carrying weight he wasn't sure he could bear. His usual confidence had been replaced by something rawer, more uncertain. "I owe this community an apology," he began, his voice catching slightly, "but especially I owe an apology to Emilia Rivera and her grandmother." The plaza was quiet in a way that felt different from Saturday night's magical silence. This was the silence of judgment being withheld, of a community waiting to decide whether forgiveness was possible. "I let my disappointment for my son turn into something ugly. I used my resources to try to tear down a child instead of helping my son understand that real talent can't be diminished by someone else's gifts." Travis approached the microphone when his father stepped aside, his young voice carrying across the plaza with the particular courage required for public shame. "Emilia, I'm sorry. You sang something beautiful, and instead of celebrating with everyone else, I let jealousy make me small." He paused, searching the crowd for her face. Your voice is a gift, and I'm sorry some of us forgot that gifts are supposed to make the world better, not threaten anyone. Agnes felt Emilia's hand tighten in hers as the attention focused on them. The crowd's expectation was palpable. They wanted to hear from the center of the story, wanted Emilia's forgiveness to complete the narrative arc from controversy to resolution. But when Emilia approached the microphone, she didn't speak about forgiveness or apologies. Instead, she began to sing, the same lullaby from Saturday night, but softer now, more intimate. Her voice carried across the plaza like a prayer offered without expectation of response. Duérmete, mi niña, que te voy a cantar, de los pajaritos que vuelan por el mar. The effect was immediate and profound. Phones that had been recording were slowly lowered. Reporters who'd been taking notes stopped writing. Children who'd been restless became still. When the last note faded, Emilia stepped closer to the microphone. "Music isn't about who's better," she said, her 9-year-old voice carrying wisdom that made the adults in the crowd feel young and uncertain. "It's about making people feel less alone." The applause that followed was different from Saturday night's ovation, not celebration of discovery, but recognition of truth that had survived attempts to obscure it. Jason Kumar, the producer from Austin, had driven down that morning and stood at the edge of the crowd, watching this child navigate adult complexity with grace that most experienced performers would envy. He'd produced albums for established artists who couldn't command a crowd's attention the way Emilia just had, with simple honesty. Dr. Patricia Moreno was also in the crowd, having rearranged her schedule to witness what she suspected might be important for her patient's family. She'd seen the stress of the past week accelerate Agnes's symptoms, but she'd also seen how hope could sometimes accomplish what medicine couldn't quite manage alone. The forum continued for another hour, with community members speaking about the importance of supporting their children's gifts, about the dangers of manufactured doubt, about the responsibility that came with being trusted with someone else's story. But the moment that would be remembered, the clip that would be shared and reshared across platforms that had recently carried conspiracy theories, was Emilia's simple statement about music's purpose. Making people feel less alone. As the crowd began to disperse, Agnes found herself approached by people she'd barely spoken to before. Families offering help with medical bills, business owners wanting to hire Miguel for work he didn't need to bid on. Neighbors who'd learned that community meant more than proximity. Grace packed extra cake for the Rivera family, understanding that comfort food could carry messages that words sometimes couldn't manage. Miguel offered to drive them home, his truck suddenly feeling like a sanctuary after the morning's exposure to public attention. "¿Cómo te sientes, mija?" Agnes asked as they rode through their neighborhood. Everything looking familiar again after a week of feeling like strangers in their own community. "How do you feel?" Emilia considered the question, watching the trailer park appear through the windshield. Looking exactly the same despite everything that had changed around it. "Tired," she said honestly, "but good tired, like after helping you with laundry, but bigger." Agnes smiled, recognizing the particular exhaustion that came from carrying more weight than should fit in someone so small. But carrying it with grace anyway. Saturday morning arrived 1 week after the talent show, bringing with it the kind of October sunshine that made San Antonio feel like a postcard of itself. Agnes Rivera woke to the sound of Emilia humming in the kitchen, a gentle melody that had become the soundtrack of their transformed life. The medical bills still sat on their table, but beside them now lay Jason Kumar's contract offer, Dr. Moreno's revised treatment plan, and a stack of cards from neighbors who'd learned that community support could take many forms beyond Sunday morning pleasantries. "Abuela!" the producer man called again, Emilia said, setting a cup of café de olla beside her grandmother's chair. She'd learned to make it exactly how Agnes liked it, strong enough to wake the dead, sweet enough to make waking worthwhile. Agnes sipped the coffee and studied her granddaughter's face, searching for signs of overwhelm or artificial maturity. that might indicate the past week had aged her beyond her 9 years. Instead, she saw the same child who'd helped hang laundry and sell dulces, now carrying additional possibilities that hadn't existed a week ago. ¿Qué piensas, mija? What do you think about making a record? Emilia traced patterns on the table with her finger. A habit from childhood that surfaced when she was thinking carefully, will it help with your medicine? The question carried weight that shouldn't fit in a child's voice. Agnes felt the familiar tug between protecting Emilia from adult responsibilities and acknowledging that those responsibilities had already found them both. See, it would help with my medicine, but that's not the only reason to decide. Across town, Travis Cole was having his own conversation about decisions and consequences. His father had been unusually quiet since Friday's public apology, spending long hours at the office working through the business relationships that had been damaged by the past week's campaign against Emilia. "Dad, are we okay?" Travis asked over breakfast, noting the dark circles under Richard's eyes that suggested sleep hadn't been coming easily. Richard set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "We will be, but some mistakes take time to fix, son, and some things I did. There's no fixing them, just living with the consequences and trying to be better." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at their front door. Richard opened it to find Miguel Santos standing on the porch, holding a manila envelope and wearing the expression of someone who'd been debating whether to make this visit. "Miguel," Richard said, his voice carefully neutral, "what can I do for you?" "Actually, I think it's what we can do for each other." Miguel held up the envelope. "I have a proposition." They sat in Richard's living room, the same space where the Doubt campaign had been planned, while Miguel explained his idea. Cole Construction had been damaged by the revelation of their role in attacking Emilia's authenticity. Miguel's auto shop needed expansion to handle increasing business. The Rivera family needed ongoing support that went beyond one-time charity. You hire Emilia as a spokesperson for community investment programs, real work, fair pay, not exploitation. Your company becomes known for supporting local talent instead of tearing it down. Richard listened with the attention of someone who'd learned to recognize genuine opportunities for redemption when they appeared. "What makes you think I deserve a second chance?" "Because your son asked for one," Miguel said simply, "and because hiding from mistakes is easier than fixing them." At River and Rye, Grace was training her new weekend manager, a position she could finally afford thanks to the increased business that had followed the past week's media attention. Community controversy, it turned out, was as effective as community celebration for attracting customers. People wanted to visit the cafe where the viral videos supporting characters worked. "The afternoon rush starts around 3, she explained to Maria, a recent culinary school graduate who'd applied after seeing the cafe featured in Elena Vasquez's follow-up articles about community businesses affected by the Emilia Rivera story. Grace had mixed feelings about her cafe's newfound fame. The increased revenue was welcome, but she'd preferred being a neighborhood gathering place rather than a tourist destination. Still, she'd learned that adaptation was part of survival, and survival had been uncertain enough recently that she wasn't inclined to reject good fortune because of its complicated origins. Dr. Patricia Moreno reviewed Agnes Rivera's latest test results with cautious optimism. The treatment plan they'd discussed was aggressive but hopeful, made possible by the combination of Jason Kumar's advance payment for Emilia's recording session and the community fund that had grown from dozens of small donations into something substantial. "The stress reduction alone has probably added months to our timeline," Dr. Moreno noted, comparing Agnes's current vital signs to those from 2 weeks earlier. "Hope is medicine, Agnes. Don't underestimate its healing power." Agnes nodded, understanding the doctor's meaning while also recognizing its limitations. Hope was medicine, but it wasn't magic. The treatments would still be difficult. The outcome remained uncertain, and the future required careful planning rather than wishful thinking. "Elena Vasquez, was working on a follow-up story about community healing after manufactured controversy, interviewing residents about how the experience had changed their understanding of social media manipulation and local solidarity. The responses were revealing a community that had been shocked into examining its own vulnerabilities and strengths. "It made me realize how quickly we can turn against each other when we're scared," said Mrs. Gonzalez, who'd become one of Elena's most thoughtful interview subjects. "But it also showed me how quickly we can come back together when we remember what matters." Saturday afternoon brought Jason Kumar to San Antonio for his rescheduled meeting with Emilia and Agnes. They met at River and Rye rather than in a formal office. Kumar's suggestion that indicated his understanding of the importance of comfortable environments for difficult decisions. Kumar was younger than Agnes had expected. With the kind of easy confidence that came from success earned rather than inherited, he ordered café de olla and tres leches cake, making conversation in Spanish that was fluent but careful, respectful of the fact that he was a visitor in their cultural space. "I want to be very clear about what I'm offering," he said, spreading papers across the café table. "This isn't about creating a child star or manufacturing viral content. It's about preserving something authentic while it exists naturally." The recording session would take place in Austin over 2 days, with Agnes accompanying Emilia and all medical needs covered. The songs would be traditional lullabies and folk melodies, music that honored Emilia's cultural heritage rather than forcing her into contemporary commercial formats. "The goal is to capture your voice as it is now," Kumar explained to Emilia, "not to change it or polish it or make it into something it's not, just to preserve this moment when you sing with complete honesty." Emilia listened with the serious attention of someone who'd learned that adult conversations about her life required careful consideration. "Will I still live here with Abuela?" "Absolutely. This is about recording music, not changing your life. You'll still go to school, still help your grandmother, still be exactly who you are now." Agnes felt something relax in her chest that had been tight since Kumar's first phone call. She'd been prepared to protect Emilia from exploitation, disguised as opportunity, but this felt different, respectful of their family bond rather than threatening to it. "There's one more thing," Kumar said, his expression shifting to something more serious. "I've been contacted by other producers, record labels, talent scouts. They'll be calling soon. If they haven't already, some of them won't have the same priorities I do." He handed Agnes a card with the name of an entertainment lawyer in Austin who specialized in protecting young performers. "If anyone else approaches you, call her first. Don't sign anything without legal review, no matter how good it sounds." As evening approached, Agnes and Emilia walked home through their neighborhood, past Miguel's auto shop where the lights were still on as he worked late to catch up on repairs he'd missed during the week of crisis management. "Abuela," Emilia said as they approached their trailer. "Are you proud of me?" Agnes stopped walking, turning to look at her granddaughter in the fading light. The question carried vulnerability that broke her heart. This child who'd navigated adult complexity with grace was still young enough to need reassurance about her worth. "Mija, I have been proud of you every day since you were born. Your voice is beautiful, yes, but that's not why I'm proud. I'm proud because you stayed kind when people were cruel. I'm proud because you thought about others when everyone was thinking about you. I'm proud because you are exactly who you're supposed to be." Emilia smiled, the simple pleasure of being seen and valued for more than her talent, lighting her face with the particular radiance that had first caught Miguel's attention weeks ago, when she'd been hanging laundry and singing without knowing anyone was listening. Inside their trailer, Agnes prepared dinner, while Emilia completed homework that had been assigned before their world changed, but still needed to be finished because some responsibilities remained constant, regardless of external circumstances. The medical bills still sat on their table, but they no longer looked like insurmountable obstacles. The recording contract offered immediate relief and future possibilities. The community support provided ongoing stability. And most importantly, Agnes felt strong enough to believe in tomorrow for the first time in months. After dinner, canta para mí, Agnes said. Sing for me, the lullaby, whichever song your heart chooses, as night settled over San Antonio. Agnes listened to her granddaughter's voice fill their small home with melody, understanding that they'd survived not just the past week's controversy, but the deeper challenge of maintaining authenticity in a world that often rewarded its absence. The autumn air in Austin carried the scent of live oaks and possibility as Agnes and Emilia Rivera stepped out of Jason Kumar's car in front of South by Southwest Studios. 3 weeks had passed since the community forum, and Emilia's voice had grown stronger rather than strained under the attention, like a plant that thrived in careful cultivation rather than wilting under scrutiny. Agnes felt her breathing ease as they walked through the studio's entrance. The medical treatments funded by Kumar's advance payment already showing measurable improvement in her energy levels. Dr. Moreno had been cautiously optimistic during their last appointment, using words like stable and manageable that felt like small miracles after months of declining prognoses. "Welcome to your recording home for the next 2 days," Kumar said, his enthusiasm genuine rather than manufactured. The studio was smaller than Emilia had imagined, warm wood paneling and soft lighting that felt more like someone's living room than the industrial space she'd expected. Sound engineer Rebecca Martinez, the same woman who'd provided technical analysis for Elena Vasquez's investigation, greeted them with the easy professionalism of someone who'd learned to make nervous performers feel comfortable. "Emilia, I've been looking forward to working with you since I heard your Plaza recording. Your voice has qualities that can't be taught. We just want to capture them exactly as they are." The first song they recorded was Duermete mi niña, the lullaby that had started everything. But instead of the makeshift amplification of the community talent show, Emilia now sang into professional microphones that captured every nuance of her voice. The slight breathiness on certain notes, the way emotion colored specific words, the natural vibrato that emerged when she forgot to be careful. Agnes sat in the control room, listening through speakers that revealed layers in her granddaughter's voice she'd never heard before. The melody she'd carried from Mexico as a young woman now lived in Emilia's interpretation, transformed but not lost, carrying forward the musical DNA of generations of women who'd sung their children to sleep in languages that bridged continents. "She's not performing," Rebecca observed quietly. "She's just being. That's incredibly rare, especially for someone who's received this much attention." By lunch break, they'd recorded 3 complete songs and several variations, building a small catalogue of music that felt both timeless and immediate. Emilia seemed energized rather than exhausted by the process, her natural curiosity about the technical equipment mixing with genuine enjoyment of the collaborative creative process. "Te gusta, mija?" Agnes asked as they shared lunch in the studio's break room. "Sí, me gusta mucho. It feels like singing to you, but for more people at the same time." Kumar reviewed the morning's recordings with the satisfaction of someone who'd trusted his instincts and been proven right. The audio quality was pristine, but more importantly, Emilia's authenticity had survived translation to professional equipment. Her voice still carried the same emotional directness that had silenced a plaza full of people on a Saturday night. Meanwhile, in San Antonio, the effects of Emilia's story were rippling through the community in ways both subtle and significant. Cole Construction had been awarded a contract to build a new community center. Their bid successful, partly because of their commitment to supporting local arts programs. Richard Cole had kept his promise about backing apologies with actions, establishing a small foundation that provided music education resources for children whose families couldn't afford private lessons. Travis Cole was taking guitar lessons from Miguel Santos, who discovered an unexpected talent for teaching music alongside his automotive repair skills. Their twice-weekly sessions had evolved into something approaching friendship, built on shared understanding of how talent and character intersected in ways that couldn't be separated cleanly. "Your dad did the right thing," Miguel said, as Travis worked through a challenging chord progression. "It took courage to admit mistakes that publicly." Travis nodded, his fingers finding the correct positions with increasing confidence. He'd been surprised to discover that learning from someone he'd indirectly wronged felt like healing rather than penance. Grace Nolan was preparing for the afternoon rush at River and Rye, where business had stabilized at a higher level than before the controversy. More importantly, she'd been approached by a food writer from Austin Monthly who wanted to feature her cafe in an article about authentic neighborhood businesses that maintained character despite changing demographics. "The secret," she'd told the writer, "is remembering that a cafe is about community first, coffee second. Everything else is just details." Elena Vasquez was working on a follow-up story about media literacy and community resilience, using the Emilia Rivera case as an example of how manufactured doubt could be countered by careful investigation and local solidarity. Her editor had greenlit a small series about social media manipulation targeting vulnerable populations. Recognizing that this story represented broader patterns worth examining, back at the studio, Emilia was recording her final song of the day, a traditional Mexican ballad that Agnes had taught her, about a bird that carried messages between separated families. Her voice had grown more confident throughout the session, finding subtle variations in each take that revealed new emotional depths in familiar melodies. "That's the one," Kumar said after a particularly moving rendition. "We'll use that take." Rebecca played back the recording, and even she seemed surprised by the emotional impact. Emilia's voice carried the weight of personal experience, separation, hope, love that transcended distance. Despite her young age, the song felt ancient and immediate simultaneously, bridging past and present in the way that only genuine folk music could manage. As evening fell, they returned to their Austin hotel, where Emilia completed homework, while Agnes called Dr. Moreno to check on test results that had been scheduled during their absence. "The numbers are improving." "Agnes," Dr. Moreno reported, "slowly but consistently. The stress reduction and treatment are both having positive effects." Agnes closed her eyes, feeling gratitude settle into her bones like warm sunlight. The recording session was going well. Emilia was handling the experience with mature grace, and for the first time in months, the future felt possible rather than fragile. The second day of recording focused on more contemporary songs, still culturally rooted, but with musical arrangements that would appeal to broader audiences. Kumar was careful to maintain the balance between accessibility and authenticity, understanding that commercial success meant nothing if it compromised the artistic integrity that made Emilia's voice special. "We're not trying to make her sound older or more polished," he explained to the session musicians who'd been hired to provide gentle accompaniment. "We're trying to create a sonic frame that honors what she already is." The resulting recordings were luminous. Traditional melodies supported by subtle instrumentation that enhanced rather than overwhelmed Emilia's natural voice. Each song maintained the intimate quality of her original plaza performance while gaining the warmth that came from professional acoustics and careful arrangement on their final evening in Austin. Kumar took Agnes and Emilia to dinner at a restaurant that specialized in regional Mexican cuisine, wanting to celebrate the completion of the recording session with food that honored their cultural heritage. "What happens next?" Agnes asked, as they shared tres leches cake and café de olla. "We master the recordings, design packaging that tells your story respectfully, and release the album through distribution channels that reach people who appreciate authentic folk music," Kumar explained. "This won't make Emilia a pop star, but it will preserve these songs and hopefully provide ongoing income for your family." Emilia had been quiet during dinner, processing the experience of the past 2 days. When she finally spoke, her question surprised both adults. "Will other children hear these songs and maybe sing them to their families?" Kumar smiled, recognizing the particular generosity that had made him want to work with Emilia in the first place. "I hope so, Misha. That's the best possible outcome." They drove back to San Antonio that night, Agnes and Emilia both exhausted but satisfied. The recording session had exceeded their expectations, not because of technical achievement, but because the process had felt respectful, collaborative, and genuinely focused on preserving something beautiful rather than exploiting it. Miguel met them at their trailer, having watched their home while they were away, and managed the increasing requests for interviews and appearances that continued arriving from various media outlets and entertainment industry representatives. "Como estuvo?" he asked, as they unloaded their small suitcase. "Perfecto," Agnes replied. "Exactly what we hoped it would be." As they settled back into their familiar evening routine, Agnes reflected on the journey that had begun with a small girl selling dulces and led to professional recording studios and medical treatments that were actually working. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but it had been theirs, chosen with careful consideration and guided by values that prioritized family and authenticity over fame and quick profit. "Abuela!" Emilia said as Agnes tucked her into bed. "I'm glad we said yes to the recording. Porque mija, because now the songs will live even when we're not singing them, like how your lullabies lived in your heart until you taught them to me." Agnes kissed her granddaughter's forehead, understanding that wisdom sometimes emerged from the mouths of children who'd learned to see clearly because they hadn't yet been taught to doubt their own perceptions. "Duérmete, mi amor. Tomorrow we start the next part of our story." Emilia's breathing deepened into sleep, and Agnes sat beside her bed for a few extra minutes, listening to the sound that had sustained her through the darkest months of illness. Her granddaughter's gentle breathing, proof of life and continuity and love that would outlast whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Outside their trailer windows, San Antonio settled into peaceful darkness, a community that had learned important lessons about supporting their children's gifts and recognizing authenticity when it appeared in unexpected forms. The plaza where everything had begun sat quiet under streetlights, but the echo of Emilia's voice still lived there, waiting for the next child who might discover that their own gift was worth sharing. Even when, especially when, the world seemed uncertain about whether it was ready to listen. In the morning, there would be school and medical appointments and the ordinary responsibilities of life that continued regardless of recording contracts and viral videos. But tonight, a grandmother and granddaughter slept peacefully, surrounded by a community that had rediscovered its capacity for wonder in a home where love had proven stronger than doubt, and where a little girl's voice had created ripples of possibility that would continue spreading long after the last note faded into memory. Did this story touch your heart? Share it with someone who needs a reminder that authenticity always wins. What did you think of Emilia's journey from doubt to triumph? Let us know in the comments. Sometimes the most beautiful voices are found in the most unexpected places, and sometimes a community discovers that their greatest treasure has been with them all along.